Thanks for coming to this session. Help, my search page is getting hammered by a bot. Which button do I need to press to get up and down? Windows computers. So to jump straight into it, I think it has become a very common problem now that AI bots are generating and accessing every single combination of facets on your search page. So when Betty talked about AI disrupting how websites can be consumed, this is another disruption. You will find that your website are grinding to a halt, that an AI bot can generate any kind of facets, not just following links, but making up links as they are, and slowing down a whole website. So before we get deeper into that, let me just get a feeling on who's actually here in this session. Who's building websites? Who's doing theming and front-end? Who's doing back-end development? And who never has to deal with any users directly? Lucky ones. Who has been dealing with a website that's going really slow and you wonder, why the hell, what's going on? Quite a lot of you as well. So just a few words about me. I'm Antje Lorch. You find me under ifrik on most social, on Drupal.org and on the Drupal Mastodon account. I'm a freelancer, so I can choose my own job title, and that is building websites for a better world. So a lot of websites for NGOs, grassroots organizations, trying to actually make the world better. And I've been looking up what I've been doing, and actually my first Drupal website I built was with Drupal 4.6, because we had a party in our house and we wanted a website for it. So speaking of putting effort into party preparation, that was that one. And let me also give you a short introduction about the examples I'm going to be using, because I've been building websites in this case for a political organization and for an NGO, environmental NGO, that have documents going back for decades. One of them really like talking about the 1980s political situation in Ireland, for example. They have documents that go back to the 1960s. And the other side is an environmental organization that has documents in several different languages, long PDFs with a lot of text. And both cases, they really like tagging their content. Like they tag it with everything. One of the sites when I took it over had kind of 5 level deeps of taxonomy. So the best way of dealing with that was actually to set up facets, so that you don't have to figure out what the political situation was at what point, what the treaty was that was discussed, to actually find this article that talks about rainforest deforestation in Brazil, for example. So when I'm showing slides, it's mainly from these organizations, and in both cases, they have a lot of volunteers running the website. So there's no way of saying you really have to do it like this and that. They will continue tagging it with whatever they can find, whatever vocabulary they find, and set up more and more terms. So just a short recap. When we talk about search pages and facets, typically you set up your search index. You say which fields should be indexed, like taxonomy terms, authors, language, content types. You make a view to actually show the search results, where you might add, for example, a full text search field as an exposed filter, sorting by date or relevance, things like that. You might choose to expose the form in a block so you can place it both on the search page but also in other places. And then, of course, you also have the facets themselves. So you need to configure the facets to see, should that be including the hierarchy of a taxonomy term, should be rewriting IDs with actual words, all of those kind of things. And then you have these facets, you also need to place them on the page as a block. So we've got at least 4 moving parts that need to be dealt with when you set up a search page with facets. And that then basically looks like this. You have the main part are the search results. You have an exposed filters and sorting at the the top, that is one form with a submit button. And in this case, you have the facets on the left, which are actually links. They are links to links to a search page with arguments already filled in. So even when they show up as tick boxes, for example, they're still just links. And in many cases, actually, the search results will be rendered entities. So you're probably not putting every field in the search, but you just say, well, show this node in its display mode as a search result. And what you find in the browser is that it comes up with a URL like this at some point. So it has all the arguments in there like, oh, that slide didn't quite break properly. But you'll see that, for example, it says language is EN, the publication type, the partner term is 77, the region is term ID 20, the node type is press for press release. It's actually quite readable once you know that they are the taxonomy terms, but it also means a generative AI bot can actually also turn that into something and trying to find every single other combination. So it could look for the same thing with language FR for French, or Spanish, or Portuguese, or English and Spanish together, even so that doesn't make sense. You might have set up the facets to only choose one language or only choose one country, but the bot doesn't care. They can just make URLs that are getting longer and longer and longer. And that takes up a lot of your processing power, of your server, of your site. So the site basically grinds to a halt. So the first things I've been looking at was, okay, well, is the robots nofollow working on that page? Well, yes, it's there, but as we know, AI bots really do not care about that. Any generative AI that is happily consuming pirated, copyrighted documents is also not caring about that you said, no, do not follow this on this page. Then I said, oh, well, I check whether the search results are cached, which usually is a good practice because typically your visitors to the site might be looking for the same things, so the search results are cached. That loads it faster. Yeah, that unfortunately means if a bot creates so many of these links that are so long and so specialized, the cache table actually grows and grows and grows. In one of the cases, the database size grew from 2 gigabytes to 18 gigabytes in such a short time that I didn't have time to see the notification before the hosting provider put the database in read-only mode, which means I couldn't even log in to clear the cache. So I had to talk to them, and they basically said, okay, we're just going to increase the cache. You clear the cache and turn the caching off, and then we see what else we can do. That works if you can actually talk to your hosting provider directly. I'm not quite sure what I would have done, because that was from a community hosting. If that would have been a commercial hosting provider where I have to file an issue to somehow be able to clear my cache, because I couldn't log in anymore either. So neither on the command line nor in the UI. So that doesn't work. In one other case, we actually just said, okay, the search page is only for logged in users. That might work in a few cases. It means the search bot can't get to the page, but there aren't that many pages where that is really an option. It works as a really short-term moment when you said, okay, I just need to find a way of fixing this without the site going down in between. So those were the 3 things that don't really work. Then came the question, should we just use Cloudflare? There are very different opinions about Cloudflare, I think. And in several of my sites, Cloudflare is not an option because of privacy concerns. Because of people not like, especially one organization is about privacy online. So they can't say, please accept Cloudflare to actually see our content about privacy. For other organizations, it might be costs. But most importantly, I also think we need to find ways of fixing these problems without retreating behind corporate walls. So what else can we do? So first of all, in the case of my community hosting, the people running the servers actually came back and said, okay, we find a way, we see that the bots are accessing URLs that have so many ampersands in them, so many arguments strung together. So let's just find a way of restricting them. So that actually, if the path is too long, it just won't load. In this case, I think we came up with 2 ampersands. That is 3 filters, which sounds sufficient. But if you, for example, go on a website and you look for a kitchen cupboard that is less than 1 meter high and less than 80 centimeters wide, probably in your region, and not broken, you're already at kind of 4 filters or so. So that it sounds a lot, but it's not sufficient. I actually also asked them what they were doing, and I got an email back that says, we did this. We mapped a variable that detects that there's more than 2 ampersands. We defined a request zone limiting to 4 requests per minute. And then in the server section, if it's a search, limit to just 4 requests per minute and straight up block any requests with 3 or more ampersands. It's like, okay, if you have a good communication with your hosting, you can do that. If I would go to a commercial hosting provider and said, could you do this? And they asked me, do you know what's it doing? I would like to say, nope, but could you do it anyway? Not really an option in most cases. So what can site builders do? What can somebody like me, who's mainly building sites, do to deal with this situation that the sites are just grinding to a halt? We came up with 3 different steps. One is to actually reduce the page loads or the entity loads using Solar Search, using facets 3 with Ajax, and then adding some spam protection. And I'll go in more detail through all of these steps. They are very well described on the documentation for Search API. So the links are on the slide here. I show the URL, the QR code to the slides at the end of the session as well again. So what were we doing with Solar Search? First of all, creating a search view that doesn't load the entities into from the database, but actually loads the entities out of the Solar index directly, and store and rendered HTML. So first thing you need to do is actually tell the Solar server to retrieve the results directly from Solar. It's a tick box that's hidden very much at the bottom of the server configuration and easy to overlook. Then you actually add a rendered item as a field to the search. When you click on Add Fields to the index, you will find actually that there's a rendered HTML output. And that allows you to say, okay, if there's any node, any content of a node type, show it in this display mode. If it's any other entity, show it in this display mode. If you've set up your site and you use very different display modes for different content entities and you don't want to go and refactor everything to call it the same, you can actually, for every single node type, say which display mode should be used. And that is then, when you set it on storage only, actually taking the whole display mode, HTML and all, and puts that into the index. Well, usually the index is really good in stripping out all of the HTML, because there's actually no point usually for indexing that, well, this is a div and this is yet another div, and maybe there's an H2. Usually we don't want that in the index. So if you're setting this up, you also have to make sure that in the processes, you turn off all the HTML filters that strip off HTML, all the ignoring cases, because if it's looking for an image that has a capital letter in there, you'd really want to have the capital letter in there. And also make sure it doesn't ignore characters, because again, they're part of your HTML. There might be, depending on how your site is set up, there might be some other places where HTML and characters and so are stripped. So if it doesn't work, go searching for where Drupal was taking off all of this work from you to make the index work very well, because this is kind of counterintuitive what the index usually does. And then when you are actually creating your view, your search view, you're actually now showing fields rather than rendered entities. And the field just only shows, you're only just going to show one single field, the one that is the rendered entity that you'd put in. And make sure it doesn't have a link to the content. Make sure it doesn't have any entity field rendering, and actually allow most HTML to be displayed. As I was doing this and writing the slides, you still had to apply a patch. Since about a week, you don't have to do that anymore. So thanks to everybody who's working on Search API for actually getting this in time and saving me one slide. So if you do that, actually now, when you look on your search page, all the content on the right should not be a node that is loaded individually, but should come from the database directly. Now, unfortunately, when you look at that, you can't really see where it's coming from. The documentation simply said, and now use xdebug to check this. I'm a site builder. I still haven't set xdebug after years and years. However, you can also do that with a simple DSM and a devel module. And thanks to X for figuring out for me on which files you should be looking at. So both in core and in the search API, there's two files where you can put a DSM to actually see whether the nodes are loaded or not. I recommend you to do that before you actually start setting up the search differently, because then you know what you should be seeing if the nodes are loaded. And the other thing is, you can of course check with the DSM on the search page itself, on the actual page that the user sees, but that will load all kind of other things that you have on that page, like all the stuff you have in the menus and everything. If you do a DSM and you use it in the search preview, it will only look at the search, so that makes it much easier. So this is in the case beforehand. Blue on black in a meeting room doesn't quite work apparently, but it gives me...
The lights
out. Yeah, but turn the lights down, yes. If somebody wants to figure out where to turn the lights down, otherwise I just tell you that in this case I put in a DSM to say, give me all the node IDs that are loaded. And yeah, thanks. Yeah. Ah, well, that's very dark. Good, then I can see if anybody of you falls asleep. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Thanks for all the tech support. So in this case, before I was changing the search, it was saying, yes, it's loading all of these nodes with these IDs. And after I changed it, it was actually coming up with the results that were loaded from a row. And that actually, as in green, you see with the full HTML of my display, div classes and everything. And the just above the green, you see it says rendered item, rendered search result. So rendered item is the field type in the search index, and rendered search result is actually the name of my field. So from that, I can actually see that when the page is loading, it is not loading an ID, it is only loading stuff directly out of the search index. So we have no entity loads, we have faster results, but unfortunately that doesn't actually stop the bots yet. But it means that at least the entity load for the search page is much lower. So the cache tables, for example, won't be filling up that much. which is also a useful thing to have. And actually, I forgot to say that somewhere at the beginning. Lots of these changes that we can make to the search are actually improving the user experience of the search. So we can do two things: stop or at least hinder the bots and improve the user experience. So the next part I was doing was using Facet 3, and that's a big thank to Streikeiser and Borison, who have been working a lot on that. So just to show you, if you use Facets 2, which has been the main branch so far, every time you click on one of these links, the page is getting loaded. And as you might see in the browser at the top, the URL that initially just says resources is getting longer and longer. Once you've set up Facet 3, you actually have a search experience like this, where you don't have any page loaders. And the URL also simply just stays the same all the time. Because this is now using Ajax. I keep on saying Ajax because I'm based in Amsterdam, and that's where you have the football team called Ajax. So, but yeah, it's using Ajax, and therefore the pages are getting reloaded much faster. I think it's much smoother experience. So, if you use that, you can actually, so if you install Facets 3 instead of Facets 2, once you add a filter criteria, you have a whole category of facets. So all of the fields that you'd put into the index now show up as options as a facet, as a filter or exposed filter you can put in there. And if you put that in as a filter, you can also configure it with actually the same or pretty much the same options you have in facets when it's a separate facet. Like you can say, replace the term ID with its label, keep the hierarchy, all of those kind of things you can now do in views. So one page less to visit. You can say that you choose Ajax for the page reload, but then you have to make sure that you don't expose the form in a block. Because Ajax does nicely reload all the page content, but does not reload the blocks, which kind of defeats the purpose of having facets, unfortunately. But if you do that, you basically have just one form that, for example, has your full text search field as an exposed filter. It has the facets as an exposed filters. It has your sorting options and then just one submit button. So where previously the different facets were links that bots could follow or that AI bots could generate in all combinations, this is now a form that needs for submitting. And in January, bots don't like submitting things, doesn't like clicking submit buttons. So that works quite nicely. It doesn't kind of display any arguments in the path, but it also fails gracefully if you don't use JavaScript. So that was nice, I thought, until I started adding all of my facets to the page. As I said, they really like tagging things. And they have an archive that goes back to the 1960s. So that didn't quite work. So I said, okay, well, we can collapse the facets. That should work. Yeah, well, kind of, because now it's still kind of jumping around a lot. So not really optimal. Kind of defeats the nice, smooth user experience I was going for. Luckily, you can actually make a custom template for views as well. For some reason, that is not coming up as a Twig suggestion if you use Twig debugging, but it works. I think if you look in the views module itself, you find this kind of structure for the template. And you can use that to actually just create a different Twig template where, for example, in this case, exposed. That's just really all you need to say for the exposed filters. You can just put them in a different div tag and then, for example, in my case, I used flex to just make sure that they show up on the left like a sidebar, even though they're not a sidebar. But yeah, that's very simple, straightforward to do with a trick template. I should actually add that to the documentation, coming to think of it. The other thing I was then looking at is that the site so far in the header region had a little search field where you could just start typing in the kind of full text search that would then show up the result on the search page. But I couldn't use exposing my form in a block anymore, because then the Ajax wouldn't work. Actually, you can just write a little bit of, well, just write the form directly in a full HTML block and place it there. That's a very fast fix for that. You could put it in a custom module, but yeah, that was faster. And I only needed one of those blocks. However, then the last issue that I haven't solved yet is the soft limit. For anybody using Facets 2, you have an option to say, give me a soft limit, as in initially only show me 3 or 5 or 20 results, which actually makes quite a nice overview when you have different facets, gives people an idea what they're getting into, but don't list all of the ones that only have like 1 or 2 items. One of the sites I've been taking this example from has a lot of partner organizations. Some partner organizations, I have hundreds of reports written together with, but then there's another 50 where they've only ever written 1 report. That makes a very long facet. So far, this kind of soft limit has been done in facets. Unfortunately, this is now part of the filters. So this would be either needed to be offered in views or probably better in better exposed filters. If anybody wants to work on an issue to make this happen, there's the issue number. And you would make me and probably other people very happy if you would work on that. So just to summarize this, Facet 3 is really great for sites with not too many facets or not too many facet items. You can work around with some additional work if there are many items. It doesn't have a soft limit, so we need to still find a way of fixing that. And obviously, this is now a form, so we have something that will stop or hinder the bots actually running rampant through your page. And because it's a form, you can also throw some anti-bot or other spam protection onto the form now. So I've been using anti-bot, which requires JavaScript for submitting the form. So once the search page is protected by anti-bot, the bots can't actually deal with this form anymore. It isn't then accessible without JavaScript anymore. So that is a trade-off, and therefore it might not be an option for all sites. In this case, the site, because I've taken it over from volunteers running it for 15 years, it's not accessible in many other places anyway, so we thought it's better to have a site where the page actually loads, rather than, and take the trade-off of saying that the search page itself becomes not possible to use without JavaScript. So to summarize that, what I did on these sites to improve the search UX and stop bots was indexing rendered entities, reducing the entity loads, using filters in a form as facets, using Facet 3, using Ajax to avoid loading the pages again and again, and optionally protecting the facets from the facet form with anti-bot. And rather than giving you the option to ask me questions, I would actually like to hear from you what other contrib modules people have been using to deal with this kind of issues, what custom solutions have been used, and if any of those is something that we could turn into modules. Because in 6 weeks, the Dev Days will be taking place in Belgium. which is a great event for anybody who hasn't been to Dev Days before. It's 4 or 5 days of people getting together, actually working together on the code with a lot of the the maintainers of different modules. So any ideas I can collect until then, I will take and ask people and make all the issues and talk to people and say, can we fix this for all of us?
Actually do it.
Yeah, I'll be there, but I also invite all of you to come there. It's a great event. The Belgian community is, just like the UK community, really good in organizing camps. And with that, I would like to thank you. And I think we got a microphone for throwing around. You are also allowed to ask questions. So. Sorry.
Thank you. So the one thing I wanted to actually, a couple of questions. Suppressive 2, the rendered HTML, how the links would work? You said don't render the entity link.
So in when the search index is indexing, usually it's just indexing fields, right, like the name of the author, the publication year, things like that. And then when the search is used, it's looking, first of all, into the index to say, okay, do I have anything that was published in 2018? Gives that as results to the search view. But then depending on how you have set up the search will then say, okay, I should show this node, that node, that node, and then it's pulling those nodes out of the database to show them. But if you change the search settings and actually index the whole node in its display mode, then it says, actually, I've got that whole thing in the search index. I don't need to go to the database. I can just take it directly from the search index.
Right.
And therefore, it all goes faster.
So the view mode, when you set up the title, you set up the search result view mode with the link to the title, so that the indexed markup would have the link already on the title.
Yeah. So I hate doing sessions where I can't just go on my laptop and say, yeah, when you set up a display mode for a node, in this case, for example, a display mode for a search result, you say, well, show me the title, show me the date, the teaser. You might make a Twig template for it that adds some extra classes or organizes them differently. And the search index, when you index a rendered entity, actually takes this whole list of fields as well as the Twig template, all of that, and puts that in the index. So in the index, it really says article with all your classes that come from the Twig template and all of that kind of things. So that all lives in the search index.
Okay. The last question. The second basic three approach, would that cut with your problem? Because you can't filter by, say, particular author and the code parameter and things, you would be able to add metadata for that author. For example, when someone searches, it comes straight to that page where you just see only that author's books. Now, because it's all one single page, when they land on the page, like they wouldn't see what they searched for, no?
I'm not quite sure I understand your question. One thing that I didn't mention in here is, yes, I've been linking already also sometimes to kind of pre-filtered pages, where, for example, say, this is a search page with all content of this author. You can actually still get to something like that if you briefly turn off JavaScript in your browser, filter it, then you get a URL you can use. For the rest, I'm not quite sure to which degree it's relevant for bots to actually index these pages with all of these filters. I want them to actually rather index the actual node pages with all of the metadata rather than overview pages. Or in the case of an author, I would probably have if the author has lots of publications, I would probably have a page on the site that has all the publications of that author. And that page, if that's getting indexed, that's useful. Filtered search pages as a whole, I'm not quite sure what the value of that is for bots in that case. I think there was another question there.
It might be time to start to wrap up.
Okay.
Last question, if it's a quick one.
Means I managed to talk slowly.
Hi. So my question is, you briefly talked about rate limiting, essentially. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, do the AI search bots, for instance, have some behavior, like they search many times within a minute or something like that, that when you're looking at that behavior, you can see that that's a bot and not a real human?
Yeah, first of all, they're really fast. I think that's why May 1st for me restricted it to 4 a minute. Any actual visitor who kind of will click through it with more than 4 searches a minute, I think actually get your searching and your reading a bit better in order. But what was most telling is that these URLs, this collection of arguments, were just getting so long and so absurd. Like saying, I want something that is Netherlands, Amsterdam, but also Spain and Barcelona and Marseille. Or English and French, which it was set up to either show English or French. So that's not something anybody could have ever clicked on. So once you look at the log of that, it becomes very obvious there are bots. One last question? Sorry, I'm stretching it. Okay, otherwise you'll find me in the lunch. And,
it is break time. You've only got 5 minutes until your next session.
Oh, sorry.
Get the next person up and running, so thank you very much.